Ahoy and a vast to all of you who are sailing on the good ship SCSM today. I know a lot of us have definite ideas of what a pirate is like, right? Big guy, pretty jazzy hat, guns, usually a fancy sort of outfit, but grubby looking. And it's an interesting thing. We know a lot of times pirates would have worn earrings. Now that was also the standard for a lot of people, just in general, men wore earrings at this point in time. But it is believed that pirates wore earrings so that if they happened to die when they were on shore, there would be money to pay for their funeral. So they could basically, like, somebody could just take the earring, turn it in for some good coin, and he would be taken care of that way. We've also heard of the phrase, a son of a gun. And it is believed that that comes to us because on the rare occasions when women were on these ships, if the time came to pass that they needed to give birth, well, a lot of times the widest area on the ship for that to take place would be between two cannons. So hence, the child would be a son of a gun. Now, there were really three outbursts of piracy. I mean, there have been pirates forever, and there are pirates still today, we know. But basically, between 1650 and the late 1720s, you have a buccaneering period from 1650 to 1680, which is where Anglo-French seamen on Jamaica and Tortuga are attacking Spanish colonies and shipping in the Caribbean. And then you have the pirate round of the 1690s, where voyages from the Americas are robbing targets in the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea. And then finally, we come to the post-Spanish succession period, which is where Anglo-American sailors and privateers were in the Caribbean, along the North American coast, the West African coast, and the Indian Ocean. So they were all over the place. And that's really the time period we're going to be focusing on today. A lot of this was in response to the cruelty of the Royal Navy and merchant ships, especially in this later period. They had mad conscription, which we'll be talking about in a little bit, and no democracy. Not that there was a lot of democracy out in the world anyway, but it was very dictatorial on these ships. There's a story of William Fly, who was a sailor who had killed the captain of his ship. And at his own execution, he actually took apart the noose and properly retied it, displaying his utter contempt of landlubbers' bad knot-tying ability. And he said, all masters of vessels might take warning by the fate of the captain, whom he had killed, and pay sailors their wages when due, and treat them better. It is the master's barbarity to them that made so many turn pirates. And as we'll see, definitely the case. We're going to talk a little bit about the pirate code, and usually Article 1 of all pirate codes was that every man shall have an equal vote in affairs of the moment. So, you know, big thoughts at that point in time. A lot of these images that we're going to be looking at come from the woodcuts from a book called A General History of the Robberies and Murders of the Most Notorious Pirates by Captain Charles Johnson. So let's look at our first fellow. This is Sir Francis Drake, and he is known to us as the English explorer who circumnavigated the globe and was the first person to sail around Cape Horn at the tip of South America. He actually didn't do that Cape Horn bit, but we'll get to that in a second. And he was a privateer. So he's English, and basically he was employed by the English government to rob ships of other countries, so a legitimized pirate. A lot of these fellows do that. He was born to Protestant parents, basically during the reign of Mary I, who was Catholic and persecuted a lot of the Protestants. So a lot of times his dad had to hide when he was growing up. But he was apprenticed to a neighbor who was the master of a bark. It was used for coastal trading with France. The neighbor was so impressed with Francis Drake that when he died, he left Drake the ship. And this inspired him then to kind of keep going bigger and better. He started making longer voyages, getting other ships, and he especially worked with his cousin, John Hawkins. So he begins his bigger career capturing slaves and taking them to the Americas. So on his third trip doing this, they're attacked by the Spanish, and he and John barely make it out alive. Now, this gave Francis Drake a great hatred for the Spanish. And shortly after that, he decided they were going to try their luck in Panama. Now, at this point in time, you don't have the Panama Canal, so you would have to take all of the Spanish gold and silver from Peru, and you would land it in Panama, narrow a little bit, and you transport it across land, get on another ship, and then go to Europe. Well, they just started like capturing the stuff on land, so they were kind of land pirates to begin with. We're told that he captured at one point in time 20 tons of silver and gold, so that's a whole lot. And it is said that during this trip, he climbed a tree on a high mountain and was therefore the first Englishman to see the Pacific Ocean. Maybe not. He did circumnavigate the globe in 1577, which they were exploring, trying to find a southern passage. Suffered a lot of setbacks, the loss of ships, and he did enter the Pacific, but it was through the Strait of Magellan, not all the way around Cape Horn. They continue capturing ships, because it's what they do, including one where he was able to get 80 pounds of gold, gold crucifixes, jewels, 13 chests of royal plate, and 26 tons of silver. Well, this made him so happy. He actually dined with the ship's officers and gentlemen passengers, and when he safely set them ashore, he actually gave them little parting gifts. So very, very giddy about that. When he got home, the share of the cargo that was given to Queen Elizabeth, who was the monarch at this point in time, was more than the entire crown's income for a whole year. Needless to say, she was a very happy girl about this and had him knighted aboard his ship, the Golden Hind, which you can see a replica of in the Thames if you ever go to London. She also gave him a jewel with her portrait on one side and a sardonyx cameo of a white European woman and an African male. So these two pictures we have over here on the left, that's a portrait of Francis Drake himself, looking very pleased with himself in his ruff, and you can see he's got the globe there. This hangs actually in the Maritime Museum in Greenwich, England. And right there on his waist, you'll see a little bit of jewelry. That is the jewel, which is depicted over on the right. Very, very fancy with these pearls and gold. And it is now actually in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Now, we're not sure about the iconography of this portrait, but we can definitely tell he's pleased with his accomplishments. So he was part of the ongoing drama with Vane and was second in command during the whole brouhaha with the Spanish Armada. So again, feathering his cap with a great victory. Really, the English super lucked out because there was a nasty storm, but you know, to the victor goes the spoils. And then he made a last trip in 1795 to Puerto Rico, where unfortunately he contracted dysentery because even though he's fancy and well off, food on ships, not great at this point in time. And he was dressed in full armor and buried at sea in a sealed lead-lined casket that has never been recovered. So that's Sir Francis Drake. And here we have Samuel Bellamy, who is also known as Black Sam or Black Bellamy. Some say he was the wealthiest pirate, but there are a lot of claims to that. He, like so many others, joined the Royal Navy when he was young, but it was tough. And this whole conscription thing, a lot of people were tricked into being in the Royal Navy. Like you might be in a pub and somebody's buying you drinks, and then all of a sudden the next day you wake up and you are on a ship at sea. You have been conscripted into the Navy, and there were really a great many cruel captains. Absolutely, you didn't have any say in what happened to you. But he decided that life wasn't necessarily for him, so he decided to be a treasure hunter because he was in love and he knew that a poor man would not be able to win his lady. So he and his crew set out to find the wreck of the Spanish treasure fleet off the coast of Florida. But that didn't go so well for them, so they turned to piracy. Sam was actually at this point in time under the command of Benjamin Hornigold, but he wasn't into attacking English ships, so really he was more the privateer as opposed to the pirate. And they decided, no, the crew was like, we have more of a say in these things than they do in the Navy, so you're not the captain anymore. And Sam was voted in. Then they saw the Witta Galley, which they decided would be the next target. This was a state-of-the-art slave ship. It was full of gold and precious jewels, which was the payment for 312 slaves in the Americas. It took them 3 days, but they eventually caught up with her, and the captain surrendered after just one shot was fired. So, nice. Not a lot of fighting that had to be going on there. He was also nicer than most pirates, so he didn't want to see the captain bereft of, his livelihood totally. So he said, here, I have a ship called the Sultana. You can have that one, and we're going to take the galley. Sail on their merry way. Unfortunately, as they continued, there was a storm that capsized the galley, and all but 2 of the men drowned. The wreck was actually discovered in the 1980s, and much of the treasure was recovered. He's known as the Prince of Pirates, or the Robin Hood of the seas. And apparently, as we're told, he once said, "They vilify us, the scoundrels do, forsooth, and we plunder the rich under the protection of our own courage." So, he was basically saying, they're doing this in a lawful way, but they're really taking advantage of the poor. We're taking advantage of the rich, but yeah, it is kind of illegal. Now, if we go to the next image, we have Charlesvane. Ugh. He is basically the opposite of our friend Sam. He's cruel and selfish, really not into the pirate code, which said that booty had to be split amongst the crew. He was very big, though, into torture and murder. And this code that I'm talking about was really the rules that a lot of these crews adopted. And as I said before, very democratic, especially compared to the Navy. With the exception of battle command, every man had a say in what decisions were made on board. Arguments were not allowed on the ship and had to be sorted out on shore. And each man got a fair share in the loot according to his role on the ship. These were usually signed, but if a ship was attacked, often they would be thrown overboard in case they lost, and this could be used to prosecute them as pirates. So, Charlesvane, not into that, and he did ascend the pirate ranks for being so cruel. He was particularly barbarous, and he refused the offer of the governor of the Bahamas to be a privateer, deciding no, he wanted to attack whomever he wanted, and he was just going to go along with that. He terrorized the coast of the Carolinas, and at one point in time, actually blockaded the harbor of Charleston, much like Blackbeard later on. But because of his cruelty, his crew wasn't terribly loyal. At one point in time, they hadn't been very successful, so he was voted out as captain, and Calico Jack Rackham was instituted instead. He was left in a little dinghy with some men. I mean, they didn't even want him on the ship. And eventually he was able to make it to land, started over, was pretty successful again, until he got shipwrecked on a deserted island. This guy was just so not well liked. There is a tale of a friend of his sailing by the deserted island, and you can see, oh yeah, that's Charlesvane over there. No, he didn't even stop for him and continued on. Eventually he was rescued. He was then taken to Jamaica and tried and executed. So things did not end well for him. And like our next fellow, Henry Morgan. with his very, very jaunty little mustache. He did work as a privateer, and as such could do a lot more marauding than your straight up pirates and get away with it. He's actually one of the few fellows, kind of like Sir Francis Drake, who was knighted for his service to the crown as a privateer. And he eventually returned to Jamaica to retire, not to be executed, which was generally the case when these guys were taken back to Jamaica. He left home at an early age, seeking his fortune, started in the Navy, then eventually decided, no, I think I want my own ship. Got that, and he started ransacking actual places like Haiti or Portobello in Panama, instead of just attacking the ships. In these examples, he seemed to be kind of claiming more for his men and himself than was usually allowed by the crown, but he was so successful they kind of let him get away with it. He actually attacked Panama at one point in time, and there was a lot of bloodshed, and there was reports of arson. At this point in time, the English were trying to get along with the Spanish who held Panama, and so they agreed that they would try him. So he's brought up before the British authorities, but by the time the courts actually hear his case, there was more friction between England and Spain again. So instead of being punished, he was knighted and made Lieutenant Governor of Jamaica. Went there, lived happily ever after. Not a bad deal. Now, this is Black Bart, and he was not given his nickname until after his death. He realized quickly not a lot of chance for upward mobility in the merchant navy even, and he knew that the alternative was dangerous. But he said, in honest service, there is thin commons, low wages, and hard labor. In piracy, there is plenty, pleasure and ease, liberty and power. No, a merry life, but a short one shall be my motto, which just sounds incredibly jaunty. So he joins up with Captain Davis, and they make their way to Portugal. Captain Davis plans to kidnap the governor, but the governor finds out and tricks Davis and his men, ambushing them and leading to Davis's death. So the pirates go away, and they regroup and elect Bart captain. He accepted, apparently saying, that since he had dipped his hands in muddy water and must be a pirate, it was better being a commander than a common man. It's very pragmatic pirate. So his first act was to return to Portugal, attack the fort, and kill all the men in retribution for Davis's death. Pretty hardcore. And this is going well for him. The plunder in Portugal is plentiful. But a deputy ran off with one of his ships, and then because of that, he started instituting new rules, saying that any pirate found stealing would have his ears and nose cut off, but that anyone who lost a limb in service on the ship would be given money from the common stock. So, you know, kind of insurance in a way. He had two different flag designs, which we can see here. We have one of him holding up an hourglass, which, you know, always means time is flying, your time is up in the whole pirate flag design area, and a skeleton. And then we also have him with this other one where it says ABH and AMH, which randomly stands for a Barbadian head and a Martiniquean head. So he's supposed to be standing on the skulls of his enemy. If we go back to this picture, you can see that the ship that he's in command of right over there on the right has the one with the two heads. Over time, he captured 470 ships. So it's more than any other pirate of his generation. He dressed very finely, as we can see here. Look at that. So, I mean, I just love all the colors. I really like those little green trousers. I kind of want them. And he planned battles in minute detail. But unfortunately, when they were attacking the HMS Swallow, he was killed instantly on deck. And the crew did not want his body to be captured hauled away and then used as an example. So they rolled it in a sail, weighed it down, and dropped it overboard. Now our next fellow, Captain Kidd. This is really where the whole idea of a pirate map comes about. So he and his family moved to New York after his father died. And he got really good at attacking French ships. So the English governors of New York absolutely loved him. Eventually, he was made captain of a ship called the Adventure Galley, and he was supposed to attack all French ships and all pirates. He was a little nervous about that last one because these might be Englishmen, and he was not happy with the idea of basically attacking his fellow countrymen. They didn't really have a lot of good luck with the ship, and he was fearing a mutiny. So he ends up in this fight with one of the gunners, and we're told that he ended up killing the guy with a bucket, which is bad on several fronts. But it's also because this was somebody who was part of his crew that was sanctioned by the New York governors. That's not just naval warfare. That is something he could have been tried for murder. So he was really concerned about that. And then he's kind of thinking, I've got some friends in high places. I'll probably be all right. But the next ship they capture, wouldn't you know it, it's totally captained by an Englishman. And then he's like, oh no, see, I don't want to do this part. Gosh. So he tries to convince his crew to give the ship back. They don't go for it. So he writes these letters when he puts the captain ashore saying, you know, remember me, remember I didn't do anything really horrible to you bodily. So if anything ever comes up, you will stand, basically, you will be a witness for me that I'm actually kind of a good guy. After several more adventures, he prepared to return home, but made sure he left a little something for his retirement on Gardiner's Island, which is off the coast of New York. Most pirates are doing the short but merry life thing. You get some gold, you spend the gold. They're not really investing in their futures. This is where the whole idea of the treasure map comes in. He was captured when he got to New York and he was sent to England. All of his fancy friends totally abandoned him, and he was charged with both murder and piracy. And he was hanged twice because the first time the rope broke and his body was placed on display as a warning to others. People found the maps and they went and they found a lot of this treasure. Still, there were some more maps, and nobody has ever actually found if they go to something. So there is entirely a possibility there is some good piratey treasure still out there, maybe off the coast of New York, maybe up in Canada. Speaking of the Carolina coast, with Stede Bonnet, named as the gentleman pirate. There's this little pirate flag over there with a sword and a skull and a heart. The hearts are not on there as like, you know, I'm a loving, friendly pirate. It's basically to strike terror, like I'm here for your heart sort of thing. Stede Bonnet, he had no right to any of that. But anyway, he was a middle-aged plantation owner on Barbados. And one day he decided, I really want to be a pirate. It kind of sounds like it was like a midlife crisis he was going through or something like that. He didn't know how to be a pirate. And so basically he went about it in every possible wrong way. Nobody's really sure what got into him, but it was like one day he ran away from home and became a pirate. So he goes and he buys a boat. Now, most pirates capture boats. It's part of the whole being a pirate thing. Stede went and he just, purchased one. And usually the way that you got a crew is you would establish your reputation, they would hear about your good leadership, and they would want to join you. No, Stede just advertised, saying, hey, anybody want to come be a pirate with me? He didn't know the first thing about sailing or pirating, so he hires a whole bunch of guys with the promise to pay them regular wages, which is also very unusual. Generally, everybody would just get a share of the booty when and if they got any. It's kind of, you know, a way of like incentivizing people. Yes, come be a pirate and you'll get a share of glorious untold riches. But apparently Stede's crew didn't mind getting the regular wages, and they did pretty well for a little while, mostly because his crew knew what they were doing, not because Stede had a clue at all. And then he goes and makes friends with another pirate, Blackbeard. Well, you don't really ever make friends with Blackbeard. So, of course, he gets tricked. Blackbeard takes over his men and his ship, but doesn't do anything really bad to Stede. He just keeps him on board. And they're as a guest, ostensibly, but he's basically a prisoner. And there are tales about him just walking around the deck in his nightgown, unable to actually take part in any of the battles that are going on around him. Now, both Stede and Blackbeard were captured by the governor of North Carolina, but they were pardoned, as long as they promised not to be pirates anymore. So they said, sure, we're not going to do that anymore, but they're not really a trusty lot, and we're soon back at it. Stede was eventually captured and tried and sentenced to death, and he was actually executed in Charleston. And here, we have the man himself, Blackbeard. Now, what's really cool about this is we know the Queen Anne's Revenge was found off of the coast of North Carolina, and this little piece of paper that you can see here over on the right, this was actually part of a book that was found in a cannon tube when they brought it up. So still around, you know, been under the water for hundreds of years, but they've been able to figure out what the book is, and it is Captain Cook's Voyage to the South Seas, which is really, really cool, because then it's sailors who were obviously reading about other sailors, and this is the book that talks about when they found Alexander Selkirk, who is the real-life inspiration behind the character of Robinson Crusoe. And that's a nifty find. I think it happened maybe 2 or 3 years ago. They were able to identify that particular book. So there he is, being really big and menacing and scary. It's said that before battle, he would plait black ribbons into his beard and put these slow burning fuses, which you can see under his hat. So, I mean, he just looks like a demon, really, absolutely a demon. So he also began in the Navy, but eventually turned pirate. Stole a ship, renamed it the Queen Anne's Revenge. And what they would do is when they approached a merchant ship, they would raise the Jolly Roger. Most captains would surrender at that point in time, especially he had a very distinctive Jolly Roger with a skeleton, like a demon skeleton holding a spear and an hourglass, and then there's a heart and little drops coming off of it. I mean, it was intense. So most people would surrender, but if not, then he had his men aim for the helmsman. So now, okay, you don't have anybody to steer your ship, and they would use grappling hooks to go across. He famously blockaded Charleston Harbor, where he took wealthy passengers off of one ship and held them for ransom. But did he want gold or jewels from the city of Charleston? No. His men were not feeling too great, and he just wanted a chest of medicine. After which they sent him the chest of medicine, and he let the prisoners go and went about his business. He eventually retired and made his home off the coast of North Carolina, got married-ish, settled down. That really wasn't the life for him. So he went back to piracy, and that was kind of the end. The governor of Virginia was tired of this and sent people after him. After a very intense battle, he was shot several times, he was stabbed with a sword, and eventually then his body was taken back to Virginia. And this is one of his crewmates. This is Black Ceasar, which the legend is that he had been a very powerful African chief. But he was tricked into going aboard a ship, like, hey, come check out our ship. You might like it. The men were very friendly and the captain was super hospitable, but there was a plot afoot. Unbeknownst to them, the anchor was raised up and they set sail. When Caesar realized this, he basically went on a hunger strike. He was so upset that he had been tricked in such a way. But there was a storm that came about, and he and one of the men that he had actually befriended actually escaped to shore. And it was from this place that they started doing their own marauding. What they would do is they would look like little shipwrecked soldiers, and they would row out to boats and ask for help. Once they were taken aboard, they would turn on their would-be rescuers and rob them, which obviously these were very incredibly powerful people, just two of them to be able to take over an entire ship. That worked pretty well for him for about 10 years. Then he decided he wanted to spend more time on the high seas and joined up with Blackbeard and was said to be with him at the last famous battle. He was cornered, but he laid a trail of gunpowder to a heap of explosives. And just as he was about to light it, he was captured. So he was taken back to Williamsburg and he was tried and executed. And now we get into some of the more unusual pirates. This is Madam Ching. And while most of the folks we've been talking about in the Western world are really from ending about the early 1720s. This is a 19th century pirate in China. She was the most powerful pirate queen of all. At one point in time, she ruled over 70,000 men. Incredible. She'd married a very powerful pirate and worked with him to expand his empire. He formed something called the Red Flag Fleet, which was a huge group of Cantonese pirates with over 50,000 members. And these are crazy numbers when you consider that in the Caribbean, this time period that we've just been talking about, there were really only 5,000 to 6,000 pirates total, much less an army of pirates. Female pirates are more common in Chinese history than the rest of the world, and she is known as a great and fierce warrior. She ran a very tight ship. Unfortunately, her husband was killed in a storm, but she just took over after that. And she had very stringent punishments for most offenses. Now, she ruled the seas for about 3 years before the imperial government made an agreement with the British and Portuguese governments to work together to end piracy. But before they started prosecuting pirates, they made a deal with her. In exchange for most of her boats and weapons, she was given amnesty, pardons for most of her men, and she was allowed to keep all of her loot. So, kind of like Henry Morgan, she lived a long, happy, and extremely wealthy life. There she is. These are the types of ships we have over here on the right, would have been common at the time. And this is believed to be a woodcut of her fiercely fighting aboard one of her ships. And this is Grace OMalley. She was the daughter of an Irish chieftain and really wanted to sail. I mean, that was just, the sea was in her blood, and her mom said, no, Grace, that is not what ladies do. And besides that, your lovely long hair would get caught up in the rigging. So Grace is like, well, I don't want that to happen. So she went and cut it all off. No problem there. What's mom gonna say? She really didn't listen a lot to her parents, and eventually her father gave in and let her join on his ships. He'd said, if we're attacked, you have to go down below, but it's not really Grace's style. So when they were boarded by British pirates, she scaled the rigging and could see that her father was about to be attacked, gave warning, he turned around, she saved his life, and they were able to overpower the pirates. She eventually married another guy and became invaluable to him, but after her husband's death, his relations refused to give her her appropriate part of the inheritance. So she decided to become a pirate herself. She would tax ships that came close to her land, sending boats to surround them and demanding money so that they could be allowed to continue their passage. This went fine for a while until the new English governor was appointed, and he tried to establish his rule over by getting rid of all of the Irish chieftains, and especially headed out for Grace. He chased her for years. He killed her son, reported her to Queen Elizabeth for treason. Grace is not having any of this, so she goes to London to try to arrange a meeting with Queen Elizabeth. Don't know why Elizabeth took the meeting, but she did. And according to legend, Grace sneezed and was given a handkerchief to wipe her nose. After using it, she tossed it into the fire. Queen Elizabeth was horrified by this wastefulness. And then Grace haughtily informed her that she would never keep a soiled handkerchief, which totally cracked up Elizabeth. And she said, you know what, yeah, you're pretty cool, so I'm going to release your family and give you back all your possessions. You're free to go. Just, you never knew what was going to make Queen Elizabeth laugh, but Grace was very, very fortunate in that instance. And here we have Calico Jack Rackham with his famous sabers crossed and his skull, Jolly Roger. There he is, looking very jaunty and debonair over there on the right. He's credited with being one of the first pirates to use like the skull and cross cutlasses on his flag. It was really all about design. It's called Calico because of his jaunty waistcoats. He was not necessarily a great or very successful pirate. Most of what we know about him has so much to do with two fabulous people who were on his ship. We know, as we talked about earlier, he'd been quartermaster for Charlesvane and was the one who was voted in as the new captain. But he wasn't very strong, brave, and he really attacked small ships and terrorized local peoples. He was kind of a punk. He'd been pardoned by the governor at one point in time, but that was before he met this certain young woman, Bonny, and her friend Mary Read. So Anne is born in Ireland, and then her father and mother moved to Charleston. Her maiden name is actually Cormac, and she was being brought up in Charleston society. Her father had been a solicitor in Ireland, but then had a lot of successful mercantile businesses. So she's very, very well to do. She's being trained. This is the proper way to do things. This is ladylike. Anne wasn't having any of it. We're told she was very beautiful, but had a fearsome temper. So what ends up happening is she starts hanging out on the docks in Charleston and meets up with this small-time pirate named James Bonny. Well, James thinks that her dad's all of his money looks very, very attractive, so of course he agrees to marry her. When they get married, William, her dad, not pleased about the situation and disinherits her. Well, James is upset and doesn't care, so they head off to Nassau, which is basically Pirate Central. When they get there, James turns into an informant against the pirates, and Anne is like, oh, no, 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 this is not the romantic life I'm envisioning. So then that's when she gets together with Calico Jack Rackham. She ends up working on his ship, and then eventually there is another woman who's brought on, the fabulous Mary Read, who's over here. They were known as incredible fighters. They were extremely brave, and when finally they were captured by the British, they were tried and sentenced to be executed. But they said, no, can't execute us right now because we're going to have babies. So then they were put in prison. Jack, of course, was going to meet his end much, much sooner. He was allowed to see Anne one last time. But when she saw him, she said, I'm sorry to see you here, Jack, but if you had fought like a man, you needn't be hanged like a dog. I mean, harsh. She just pulled no punches. We know that Mary died of a fever in prison, and there's a rumor that Anne may have too. but mostly she disappears from the historical record. And new evidence has come to light that many people believe what actually happened is Anne's dad found out she was in prison, went down, basically ransomed her, got her out, took her back to Charleston, where she got married to a fellow named Joseph Burley, had 8 more children, and died at the ripe old age of 84. I can only imagine what it would be like to have Anne Bonny as your grandmother. That would have been a whole thing. And our last is, sadly, she's not a pirate. She is the victim, we believe, of piracy. This is Theodosia Burr Alston, who was the only child of Aaron Burr, famous especially for his duel with Alexander Hamilton. Theodosia married Joseph Alston, who was the son of a wealthy planter in Charleston. And they lived in South Carolina. They had a little boy named Aaron Burr Alston. Unfortunately, he died of malaria when he was about 10 years old. And it is believed that this just threw Theodosia into such incredible depression. Also, you know, her dad was tried for treason and had to go off to Europe for a little while, but that's a totally different story. After her dad came back, she decided she was going to go visit him in New York. So on New Year's Eve in 1812, she boarded the Patriot in Georgetown Harbor and set sail. And a week goes by. She doesn't show up in New York. Nobody's getting any letters from her. Another week, another week, another week. Her husband had been elected governor of South Carolina, and now he's really fretting. Aaron's really fretting. She was never seen again. We don't know what happened to the Patriot. There's stories about storms and being shipwrecked, things like that. The reason why we have these 2 pictures is over here on the right, that is an actual, we know that is a portrait to be of Theodosia Burr Alston. The one on the left, though, is believed to have come from a shipwreck that might have been part of pirate booty at Nag's Head in North Carolina. And it is said that, for 15, 20 years after her disappearance, on their deathbeds, various old pirates told the same story about a beautiful woman who refused to go and be with the captain in exchange for her life. And her name was something like Theodosia Burr Alston. So it's entirely probable that what happened is Theodosia met her end because of pirates, and the portrait that we have over on the left is something that would have been included in the cargo on the ship she was sailing. And that's it. I mean, it's really not it, but that's what we're doing today.